Hello and welcome to a slide presentation by Lena Wells, the herbalist from Windsor Health in Invercargill. Today we're going to take you through a presentation on how to use herbs from your garden to make basic home remedies for all of the family. I have a clinical diploma in herbal medicine, which means I love playing with herbs. I've also got a bachelor in applied health majoring in complementary medicine, which is more about assisting people to treat health problems using various options of capsules and tablets and tinctures, and also taking into account research-based approaches to natural health care and making sure that there's no conflicts between natural options and pharmaceutical things that people might be taking. I'm also the current president and an accredited natural fertility educator with Natural Fertility New Zealand. This is where we assist couples that are trying to conceive or wanting to avoid conception by charting their signs of fertility. I absolutely love practicing herbal medicine at home from the herb garden, picking herbs and harvesting them, and I'm renowned for treating many of our animals, especially at home, and family members with my homemade herbal medicine. Unfortunately, when it comes to treating people in a clinical situation, like we would from the clinic at Windsor Health, there are some disadvantages to using herbs from the home garden. And part of this is the huge variation between seasons, and herb identification and having the correct herbs is actually very difficult. A lot of herbs we actually grow now are varieties rather than the truly medicinal one. So when it comes to getting really clear clinical results and knowing exactly what dose you're giving people, it is much easier to use pre-prepared capsules and tablets. We've been through really rigorous testing processes and we know exactly what we're giving people. So whilst home medicine is fun and I highly recommend it for everyone to use, and there's a lot of things we forget that we have available right on our doorstep that are very helpful for boosting our health. It isn't so useful perhaps in a clinical situation, but it's a lot of fun at home, so it's well worth it. I'm a Southland girl. I was not born in Southland. I was actually born in Ashburton, but I've been raised in Southland since I was one. And I've had the lucky opportunity of being raised on a farmlet, so lots of opportunities to play with animals and learn about gardening. And I've always had a mum who's a very passionate gardener, so we've always been surrounded by a big variety of plants in abundance and had the opportunity to make a lot of concoctions. And this is part of my own herb garden and a farmlet. My favourite tool, which is my tractor, which really has very little use on 5 acres, but I do take it for little rides around just for fun. These were two of my guinea pigs from last year. On the left here, we've got one of my sheep. And the vet never knew exactly what it had, but it had some sort of virus through its system, and I found it out with the rest of the sheep. A very healthy lamb, and I treated it with all sorts of different bits and pieces and expired goods from the shop, but things anti-inflammatories, immune boosting tonics, and didn't seem to mind too much. I did use the drench gun as a herbal applicator, and by the end of the season, when it was ready for to move on to its next stage of life, we couldn't tell which one it was, so that's always a good sign that it obviously made a good recovery. That's the dog that helps round them up when they're not actually paralysed. One of my pet lambs, and we've got one of the pet lambs, the same one actually, and that is my calf Buttercup, who is now a huge cow and has her own calf that looks just exactly like that. And this is our Windsor Health shop in Windsor on Burke Street. And this is actually a photo taken from the Spring Bonanza Day, which happens every year around sort of September, October. It's always an opportunity to have a lot of fun, and we usually have a petting zoo available for people to go and pet some of the animals that are usually lots of them around at that time of year. Just some examples of the things that we stock in the shop. This is particularly relevant when we're looking at making our own homemade products. Athik are a very natural range of healthcare shampoos, conditioners, deodorants, and they are all formulated out of solid bars. And you can make similar ones at home. It is very difficult to do shampoo and conditioner, but much fun can be had doing the deodorant ones. Exfoliants and body butters are all relatively easy to try at home. You can buy a thick, of course, and not have to make it at home, or you can buy a thick and copy some of their ingredients. See Christmas reindeer in the window. Just some of our homeopathic range, some of our protein range that we stock, lots of crystals and incense. Over there in the corner of the shop, you can see just a portion of our essential oils, which when you're making your own homemade remedies is really, really useful. You can never have too many essential oils, just gives you more and more options. And we also have a wide range of base oils as well. And this is some of our back wall, which is where all our bottled supplements are. So when it comes to taking herbs that you either can't grow in Southland, or things where you need a really high strength herb or a dose that's been quantified, I would still always recommend going with your tablets and your capsules from your big brands where they are actually testing the strength of those active chemicals in them. This is me in my clinic room, and behind me are one of my favourite things to use, and that is these. These are herbal tinctures. So these are fresh herb usually, and they are made in an alcohol base. And I don't make these. These are made by a New Zealand company called Phytomed mostly. And they're a really strong way of taking herbal medicine, and a simple way. It means that you can still get the herbs as you would from your garden, in individual herbs rather than pre-concocted combinations of herbs. And the only other ingredient is the ethanol with them, so they are lovely and pure. Because they're all individual herbs, I can make up combinations of them to suit different health troubles. For example, if someone has a immune deficiency and we're trying to build their immune system up, we could use echinacea, astragalus. We could use a bit of licorice if they're run down. If they've got a bit of inflammation, you might add a little bit of devil's claw, a bit of ginger for circulation. And so we can make up a concoction that's very specific for one person's health needs, which is so much more fun than going and buying the pre-combined tablets and capsules. It means that we can get a more specific health outcome. Just an example of some of the clinical products that I use by Metagenics, which is a company that produces, I guess you'd say, the next level up in products, a little bit higher strength than what you can get over the counter. And they are items that I can prescribe after I've had an appointment with people, just to check that they are safe. These are some teas that I've made in the past that I've harvested from home. You can see some lavender there, and the calendula flowers in the bottom right hand corner are just spectacular. Calendula grows so well, also commonly marigold, and the orange of the petals is just spectacular. So the first thing I want to run through today is making a herb infused oil, which is exactly how it sounds. It is an oil that is infused with some sort of herb that you've picked from the garden, or perhaps you've brought some of the dried herb and you're going to infuse it into your oil. Two methods for this: hot method and a cold method. Hot method, the pros with this is it's very quick. Within sort of overnight, you can have a basic oil ready to go and ready to use to make something else or to use on your hair or your skin. Some downsides of doing it hot are if you're not careful, you can overheat the herb and therefore it can lose some of its medicinal qualities. You can also damage the quality of the oil. So if you were wanting to use a base oil that was a raw virgin oil, if you're going to heat it, you're actually going to lose that property. So if you wanted to use a very special cold pressed wheat germ oil and then you wanted to make a hot infusion, you'd effectively be sort of foregoing all the expense you spent on that oil. And so in that case, you'd really want to do what you'd call a cold infusion. With a cold infusion, it's very simple. You get a jar of some sort, fill it with the oil that you have, the base oil, and then put your herb of choice into that base oil. Leave it to steep in the jar for months. When that herb material inside the jar starts to look faded, like it's lost its colour, take it out, replace it with some fresh herb, and keep it sitting. You don't want to put that in direct sun because that will damage the oil, so just somewhere out of the sun. Doesn't necessarily have to be a dark place, and you're not necessarily going for a warm place either. The pantry is probably a really good option. So the longer you leave that to steep and the more often you replace your herb material, the stronger your cold infused oil will get. So you do have to be patient with a cold infusion, whereas if you're like me and you're a little bit impatient, you've got other things you want to make with your herb infused oil, then the hot method is awfully handy. The other way that you can do a hot infusion, especially if you have a modern slow cooker that goes on a very low heat setting, is you can actually use the slow cooker, put your oil directly in the slow cooker, or you can also put the oil into a bowl inside your slow cooker if it does run a bit hot, then put your herb inside it, and then you can leave it on overnight. There's no risk of it running out of water, there's no risk of anything going on fire if you need to leave the house. It means it can just work away in the background without too much interference. And for a lot of for the 3 infused oils that I use for the demonstration of this talk, I simply use my slow cooker on overnight with one big batch of herb in it, so as much herb as I can fit into that oil, and then drain the herb off the next day, and my oil is ready to go. If you're doing a really, really good quality herb infusion and you're using the hot method, the more often you replace that herb material, strain it off and put fresh herb material into your oil and keep heating it, the higher quality it's going to be, the more medicinal value it will have, and the stronger it will smell, and the better your colour will be. So it really all comes down to how much patience you've got, what kind of quality you'll end up with. Just remember, because we're doing an oil product here, we don't want any water involved. Some tricks to reduce how much water you will end up with are allowing your herbs to wilt for a few days before you use them, especially if they're juicy herbs like chickweed. If you can use the dried herb, that does avoid any issues with water. The other thing to keep an eye on is condensation. If you use the slow cooker, make sure you leave the lid off. That way you won't get condensation on the lid that then drips back into your oil. If you do end up with quite a lot of oil in your mix, you'll notice it separates. So there'll be an oil layer and a water layer in your oil. And the problem with that is it will cause your oil to go rancid very quickly. So you can try and pour it off, but it's always difficult to save from that point. So whatever you do, avoid getting as much water in your mixture as possible. So choosing your base oil that you're going to use for your infused oil, you just have endless options and there's no right or wrong answer. Things to think about would be the cost. Olive oil, grapeseed oil are relatively cheap, so if you're going to do a big quantity, they're always a winning option. They also don't have too much scent. So if you want a lavender oil with a lovely lavender scent, you will find if you use something like coconut oil, you're going to have a very coconutty undertone. Whereas if you use a plain olive oil or a grapeseed oil, it won't interfere with the scent as much. If you use coconut oil, it'll also be a lot heavier and will set at the other end, whereas you'll have a lovely liquid if you go with a more liquid oil. If you've got plenty of money to spend, then you can make deluxe ones using jojoba oil or wheat germ. They would probably be a little bit better used if you're doing the cold method so that you don't damage the oil with any extra heat. No right or wrong answer, it's quite fun to experiment. They do also have slightly different medicinal qualities as well. So wheat germ would be a little bit more nourishing, higher in vitamin E. Jojoba is actually a wax ester, so it's absorbed deeper into the skin than a lot of your oils are, so it can help pull some of those medicinal values from your herb deep into the skin. Coconut oil has natural antifungal properties, so that will be very useful if you're making a foot balm. Next, you can pick your herb, and there's no limit to ideas here, but some of my favourites are calendula petals. Really lovely healing, beautiful colour. Thyme is antibacterial. Rosemary is a lovely circulatory stimulant, and also when you're inhaling it, it's great for memory and calming the mind. Lavender, calming, antibacterial. It's also antifungal and slightly antiviral. Chickweed is one of my favourites. It's antipyretic, which means it stops itching. It's also very soothing, so great for children with eczema or adults, and also a lovely thing to have in the cupboard to apply to itchy bites. And burns as well. It's beautiful and calming on burns. Nettle is very nourishing. It's got a lot of nutrient value in it. Great for skin conditions. And the same with borage. It's high in essential fatty acids, which is great for eczema and locking moisture into the skin. And lemon verbena, slightly stimulating, slightly antibacterial, great for clearing sinuses, and also smells absolutely amazing. So it's one that smells great in the kitchen while you're making it. And here are the instructions for making the oil. So very simple, like we discussed, you're pretty much just going to put your oil of choice into either your slow cooker or into your double boiler, or if you're doing the cold method, into your jar, and then pack as much herb in as you can. Make sure you bruise the herb or chop it up as finely as you can. When you remove any of that herb, either to replace it with fresh herbs or to end up with your final products, you want to sieve them off very gently with a muslin cloth or a jelly bag is an ideal way to do it. Don't squeeze the herb, or that will actually squeeze out water, which you don't want in your oil. So just make sure when you remove it, you will lose a little bit of oil. Don't squeeze the herb material. This recipe is also available by itself on our blog. Once you have prepared your herb-infused oil, one of my favourite things to do with it is to make a basic balm recipe. This could be a lip balm, it could be a rub for stiff joints or sore muscles, it could be a balm to put onto eczema, ribble rash, or baby's bottoms. It could also be a balm that's antifungal and antibacterial, handy for all the family to put on school sores or athlete's foot. Or something like the chickweed to put on itchy patches. And once you've got your herb infused oil, you can use it to include in this recipe. As you'll see, we've used 3 tablespoons of our herb infused oil. This is a very loose recipe. It can be changed up and adjusted just to how you like it. You could exchange the olive oil for any other oil, and you can also exchange the manuka honey and the cocoa butter for shea butter. The options are endless, as long as you stick with just oil products and don't add any water-based items. So no rose water or witch hazel or aloe vera, only your oils. And the only exception to that would be a little bit of something like manuka honey. The more beeswax you put in, the firmer it will be. So just remember that if you want a firmer balm, just add a little bit more beeswax. If you want it to be looser and more liquidy, then a little bit less. I've done an example of 3 base balms you might like to use. So as a joint one, I've used some rosemary oil, which was great for circulation. For a healing, soothing balm, I've swapped out the oils for a combination of jojoba, which is healing and soothing, wheat germ, high in vitamin E, locks in moisture, vitamin E, which will help preserve your oil and is also very good for your skin. I've also put in a little bit of manuka honey in that one, and sage, which is great for drying out any weepy skin conditions. The antifungal and antibacterial one, I've used some lavender oil, which is always a great antifungal, antibacterial. And I've also made some suggestions under each one of those for some essential oils you might like to blend through. The joint one is just amazing on sore, tired muscles. And there's no rules with the essential oils. If you have very sensitive skin, beware. They are what you'll probably react to out of all the other ingredients will be the essential oil, so just go a bit lighter on them. Another easy thing we could make with ingredients from our garden, especially if you're a keen gardener, is a fire tonic. Really, really simple. All you do is take all of the ingredients, chop them up as finely as you can, put them into a jar, like say a 500 ml jar or a 1 litre jar, and then fill that jar up right to the top so everything's submerged with a good quality cider vinegar. Let this steep, shake it every now and then, just in a dark place like the pantry. You can start drinking it straight away. A week gives it more time for those ingredients to poach. And the longer you leave it, the stronger it gets. So it's a bit like whiskey. You can leave it indefinitely. You can even take out your herbs and your chopped veggies and replace them with fresh ones and make it even stronger if you like. And if you don't have something, you can leave it out. Some of my favourite things that have been grown in the garden this year would be the horseradish root. Horseradish loves Southland. We've got heaps of wet climate for it. If you manage to get a little piece of horseradish root off someone in your area, you'll find it takes off really quickly. In fact, you actually have to watch it doesn't take over areas because it seriously grows quickly. Ginger root, unfortunately, we do have to purchase down here. Garlic we can grow really well. Black pepper would be a supermarket purchase. Chilies we can grow in hot houses. Thyme can be grown at home. Horopito is the native pepper tree, which looks a little bit like a pittosporum to me. I luckily have a mum that grows a horopito, which has got a lovely spicy flavour and is antibacterial and good for digestion. You can also find it around in bush areas in New Zealand as well, so that's a backup option, but it's an optional ingredient. And cane pepper, which is from your supermarket, and just be careful, half a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon. I often accidentally put in 2 teaspoons, and that is the thing that will just make it incredibly strong. So beware. Can also add herbs to that. I do like to add a little bit of parsley, which is a good blood cleanser. It purifies your system, it's detoxifying, good for your kidneys. A little bit of rosemary is really nice as well. Options are endless. If you add too many green ingredients, it won't keep quite as well. So your fire tonic is particularly good for enhancing your immune system, warding off any winter bugs. It's also a digestion stimulant. So for people that struggle with eating breakfast in the morning, they feel like their tummy just sits around. This is a really nice way to start the day with a little nip of this, just to warm your system up and get those digestive juices flowing. It's also a little bit antibacterial and also a little bit anti-inflammatory, and can help with reflux, which with the cider vinegar in there always is counter what you think. But it gently stimulates digestion, so it's worth a try for that. Can take it as a little nip, 10 mils of it straight. It also makes a really lovely hot drink, which is a bit more palatable for children. And to do that, you'd put your 10 mils into a lovely hot cup with some lemon and some honey in it, and some nice warm water. Let it steep, give it a stir, give it a drink. It'll help clear your sinuses. And my last favourite thing to make out of items you've collected from the garden is a herbal tea. So at the moment, I've been presenting the slide in winter, and it always just makes me wish I'd harvested more in summer. Because you really have not too many herbs in your pantry ready to blend a herbal tea. And a lot of them aren't particularly good to pick in winter because they've disappeared. So in summer, get out, pick things like your chamomile flowers, throw them in an easy container for them to dry in the superheater and forget about them, because when winter comes along, we've got the longer nights, more time to muck around in the kitchen. That's when you'll really be thankful that you harvested plenty of things in summer. Great options to harvest from your garden for teas would be your lemon verbena, chamomile flowers, calendula flowers, dandelion flowers, lavender flowers. Roses are good, but you do need to make sure that the variety is correct. So have a little Google, and it is easiest if you've purchased the rose and you know for a fact that it's one that has edible medicinal qualities rather than being a pretty variation. Dried nettles are also a really nice option. Very difficult to grow where you want them to grow. You kind of have to just go and find them where they choose to grow. And just make sure with things like nettle that before you dry them, pick through and just make sure that any damaged leaves or anything that's got bird droppings on it, because they often grow under trees, has been biffed out. It's much harder to see once it's dried. Fruity components, so lemon verbena would count as that. You can also make your own citrus peel. You can purchase from Windsor Health things like hibiscus flowers and rose hips, which add a lovely fruity element. Goji berries, you can also get freeze-dried berries, add a lovely fruity part to your tea. Add a little bit of sweetness as well, which is quite nice. Here we've also got the idea of a cooling herb, which can also be cooling or an extra medicinal herb. So mint is a really lovely option, borage, and any other herb that you want just to round off your tea collection. So when you're combining your tea, you want to think about the smell, the colour, the texture, and the taste. If it involves all of those senses, you're more likely to enjoy it when you sit down with your cup of tea. So as you're formulating it, think about whether you've ticked those boxes and have a really good look at it, a critical analysis of how your tea is looking and smelling. Another way of making sure that you get some rough ratios correct is to follow these rules here. So it's suggested that your tea is made up of 2 parts placeholder or base flavour, something like nettle or your red raspberry, a flowering note, which could be your calendula or your chamomile or some eyebright, that would be 1 part, a fruity component, which would make up 1 part, and a cooling or your extra medicinal herb, which would make up 1 part as well. So 1 part or 2 parts, doesn't matter what size container you use to measure that out, as long as you're consistent across everything that you measure. So 1 part might be 1 dessert spoon, or it might be 1 cup, and that also depends on how much of the herb you have available to use. And it will have a big impact on how much you end up with once it's fully blended. I always suggest you make a little quantity, even use a teaspoon of each, and then steep it in boiling water and let it sit for 15 minutes and have a taste and adjust it according to the flavour and give it a wee tweak. It takes a long time to get a herb tea that actually has a really lovely balance of flavours. But at the end of the day, it's just good fun. You can make a beautiful medicinal tea, really easy to make teas that help with sleep. Or a digestion tea is another really lovely one to make. Calming teas that you can drink throughout the day, or something quite invigorating with some peppermints in it, is always a really lovely option. So the options are endless, and there's no wrong herbal tea. But the more time you spend practicing, the more likely it is that you'll end up with something that's truly delicious. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send us a question through our website or through our Facebook page. If you're not a big grower, you can purchase a lot of the dried materials in the individual herbs such as valerian, hops, chamomile, and calendula, all individually through our website, through the More Life tea range. Very good value, so you can afford to have a big collection. We also stock a huge collection of the essential oils and all the ingredients you need, such as the beeswax, even down to the amber bottles and the amber tubs to fill to make your own balms. So any of those things you need, visit our website or come and see us in store, and don't hesitate to ask us any questions. There's never a silly question, and I'm sure I've probably forgotten to elaborate on something. So have fun, that's the main thing.